He had everything: power, fame, billions, stormy. Until the day a homeless girl handed him back his lost wallet and unknowingly returned a piece of his broken past. Inside wasn't just money, it was a photograph that shattered his world and changed both of their lives forever. If that already moved you, just wait until you hear what happened next. The city never slept but for her. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. 10-year-old Aria sat under a flickering street lamp, knees drawn to her chest, her torn jacket soaked through from the rain that hadn't let up in hours. Beside her, a damn cardboard sign leaned against her backpack. Please, anything helps. People passed, umbrellas opened. Windows rolled up. No one saw her. That morning, Aria had eaten half a banana, the first thing she'd had since Tuesday. She clutched the small cloth doll her mother once gave her, the only piece of family she had left. Then she saw it: a leather wallet. Thick, fancy, dropped near a Blacktown car parked just outside her luxury calf. She could have taken it, could have run, bought food, maybe even shoes. But instead she picked it up and walked to the man who dropped it. He looked powerful, distant, untouchable. He turned, surprised to see her. His suit was spotless, his wristwatch worth more than her life's possessions. Aria held out the wallet with both hands, trembling. "You dropped this, sir," she said, her voice barely louder than the rain. He opened it and froze. His eyes locked on something tucked behind the cash. A faded photograph of a child, with eyes like his. The world around him seemed to blur. This wasn't just a wallet. It was a door to a past he thought was buried forever. And the girl who returned it might just be the one who will rewrite his future. He stared at the wallet in his hands as if it had just whispered a secret only he could hear. The rain continued to fall, but Ethan Blake didn't move. The billionaire tech mogul, known for his icy composure and ruthless decisions, was suddenly frozen not by fear, but by something far more dangerous: recognition. That photograph, that small, crinkled photo behind the credit cards, it wasn't just any child. It was her, the little girl he had once held in his arms for just a few seconds before she was taken away. The photo had been tucked there for years, untouched, a silent reminder of the daughter he never got to raise, of the woman who disappeared without a word, leaving behind nothing but a hospital named Agan, a goodbye note that read, "I'm doing this to protect her." Now, standing in the rain, she stood in front of him. Not the woman, the girl, the same eyes, the same quiet strength, the same look of defiance and fear, all wrapped in innocence. "What's your name?" he asked, voice cracking despite himself. She hesitated. "Aria." A lump formed in his throat. He swallowed hard. Aria, the name he never got to choose. The name that now burned through every wall he'd built to forget. He wanted to ask 100 questions, to pull her inside, wrap her in warmth, feed her until she smiled, but all he could manage was, "Are you alone?" She nodded, eyes downcast. "Since Mama got sick. I've been trying to take care of myself." The world tilted beneath him. This couldn't be real. But it was. The girl who'd returned his wallet had unknowingly returned something far greater: his reason to live. He looked down at her, rain dripping from her hair, and whispered to himself, "You came back to me." Back inside the mansion, everything felt different. Aria sat quietly at the edge of the plush velvet couch, her damp shoes neatly removed, her small hands clutching the cup of hot cocoa. The housekeeper had prepared. She didn't speak much, only offered a polite thank you and a faint smile. But Ethan couldn't stop staring. She didn't just remind him of someone. She was someone. He moved carefully, trying not to overwhelm her. He had. spent years mastering boardrooms, facing down global press, handling billion-dollar crises. Yet now, in his own home, he was nervous, as if one wrong word might scare her away forever. "I'd like to help you, Arya," he said softly. "You don't have to go back out there tonight." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she slowly reached into the small canvas satchel she carried and pulled out something wrapped in a faded napkin. "I don't know if you want this," she said, voice uncertain. "But Mama always said, if something ever happened to her, I should find the man in this picture." Ethan leaned forward. Inside the napkin was a single item. A torn photograph, the same one that once sat on his office desk years ago. Him and her mother, together, smiling, before everything shattered. He felt the air leave his lungs. It wasn't just a resemblance. It wasn't just a theory. It was real. Where is your mother now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Arya looked down at the floor, blinking rapidly. "She got sick," she said quietly. "Before we left the last shelter, she made me promise to be brave. That's why I've been out. I tried to sell flowers, clean car windows, anything." Ethan's chest tightened. She hadn't just returned his wallet. She had brought back the part of him he thought he had buried forever. And now she was all alone. No more guesses. No more denial. This was his daughter. The question wasn't whether he would help her now. The question was how to undo years of silence and find the woman who had once walked away from him, without ever telling him the truth. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk, long after Arya had drifted off in the guest room, her small frame cold beneath the warmth of a thick comforter she hadn't known in years. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the city beyond his estate sparkled cold, distant, heartless. But his world had just shifted. The photo. Her eyes. That name, Eleanor. It had been over 8 years since Ethan last saw her. She had vanished from his life in a single letter. No cause, no explanations, just a goodbye scribbled in haste, and a heartbreak that bled into everything he did after. She had been the one woman he ever truly loved. She wasn't rich, wasn't powerful, but she had a fire, a warmth that disarmed him. She'd walked into his company as a catering assistant and turned his whole life upside down. While others saw his wealth, she saw his wounds, and he loved her for it. But one day, without warning, she was gone. And now her daughter, their daughter, was sleeping just a room away. He opened his laptop and searched through every record he could access. Old employee files, public hospital databases, even old social media tags, but Eleanor Hayes had disappeared from every traceable thread. No forwarding address, no medical history, no burial record. Was she alive? Was she close? Was she hiding? The next morning, Ethan pulled Arya aside. She sat at the breakfast table, slowly munching on buttered toast like she wasn't used to food that warm or seats that soft. "Arya," he began gently, kneeling beside her chair, "can you tell me anything more about your mother?" She hesitated, then nodded. She never wanted to talk about her past. She said it was too dangerous. But some people didn't want us to be found. But sometimes, at night, she would whisper your name in her sleep. "Ethan, I always wondered who you were." He swallowed hard, pain clawing at his chest. Then she added something that made his blood run cold. Before she got sick, she was working as a cleaner at a big hotel. Downtown, I think she left something behind in her locker. A clue. A thread. A second chance. Ethan stood. "We're going to find her." And for the first time in years, his voice carried something it hadn't in a long time. Hope. The downtown hotel loomed like a forgotten memory. Ethan hadn't stepped into a place this ordinary in years. He was used to 5-star suites and VIP elevators, not flickering lobby lights and worn-out carpets. But today wasn't about luxury, it was about truth. He walked in wearing a simple jacket and jeans, trying to blend in. Beside him, Aria clutched his hand tightly, her wide eyes scanning the space with cautious hope. The front desk clerk barely looked up. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Ethan said gently. "I'm looking for a locker. It belonged to a former employee, Eleanor Hayes. I believe she worked T-rate, maybe 9 months ago, as a cleaner." The clerk frowned. "We don't usually release employee information." Ethan reached into his coat and placed a business card on the desk. "Ethan Maddox, SIO, Maddox Enterprises." Her eyes wide and slightly. "Give me a moment." She returned minutes later with an older man in maintenance overalls. "Mr. Maddox, this is Mr. Turner." He was Eleanor's supervisor. Turner studied Ethan carefully. She was a good worker, quiet, kind, didn't talk much, but she smiled when she spoke about her daughter. He motioned for them to follow. Down a quiet hallway, they arrived at a staff locker room, musty, dim, filled with silence. Turner pointed to a corner locker with peeling paint. She never came back to clear it out. "We figured something happened. But rules are rules. We didn't throw it away." With trembling hands, Ethan opened the locker. Inside was a small, faded duffel bag, a children's drawing, a hospital bracelet with Aria Hayes printed in faint ink, a worn-out photo of Ethan and Eleanor, taken during one of their rare weekend getaways back when they still believed in forever, and at the bottom a sealed envelope, with 2 words scrawled across it in faded blue ink. "For Ethan." His hands shook. He sat on a nearby bench and slowly opened it. Inside was a letter, her handwriting, her heart. "Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone, sorry. I never wanted to leave the way I did. But I had to protect our daughter. There were people who didn't want me near you. People from your world who threatened everything. I left because I loved you. Because I couldn't let them hurt you or Aria. If fate ever leads you to her, love her, please. She deserves more than I could give. And if you still remember me, remember the girl who once held your hand in a crowded kitchen and believed that love was enough. Always yours, Eleanor." Tears fell silently onto the page. Aria sat beside him, watching quietly. "Was that from my mom?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, and she loved you more than anything." Aria leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. And in that still, aching moment, something changed. Not just for Ethan, but for both of them. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about what came next. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. Eleanor's letter stayed pressed against his chest as he sat alone in his penthouse study. Outside, the city pulsed with live cars below. Sirens in the distance, but inside, all he could hear were the words, "There were people from your world who threatened everything." Who were they? He turned to his private laptop, the one with full access to old legal records, private messages, and security logs from his company. Eleanor had been gone for almost a year, but suddenly it felt like the world was rewinding, dragging him back to the days before she vanished. He opened a file labeled Board Threat Reports Internal. There it was. A flag report dated 10 months ago. Subject to an authorized person L. Inc. to see. No classified risk assessment. He scrolled. Recommendation: disengage the individual discreetly to preserve the company's public image. Further contact poses potential, reputational, and financial risk. If she does not comply, we act. Signed by Victor Langston, CFO. Ethan's stomach turned. Victor, his oldest business partner. The man who toasted his engagement, who sat at the head of the table when Ethan took the company public. He had threatened Eleanor. That was why she disappeared. That was why she ran. Ethan's hands clenched the armrest. A father stripped of the woman he loved. A daughter robbed of her mother. All for the sake of shareholder reputation. He stood up sharply, heart pounding. The image of Eleanor's tear-streaked face as she wrote her final letter burned in his mind. There would be no more silence. No more pretending. The next morning, Ethan stormed into the Maddox Enterprises boardroom. The air was crisp and fake full of polished smiles and shallow greetings. Victor was already seated at the table, sipping espresso like he owned the place. Ethan didn't sit. He tossed the printed memo across the table. Explain this. Victor barely blinked. That, a routine precaution. You were distracted. She was a cleaner. We were protecting your legacy. My legacy? Ethan's voice was ice. You mean the woman I loved, the mother of my child? You call that a distraction? Victor leaned back. Look, Ethan, you were falling, fast. We did what we had to do to keep the Empire stable. She didn't belong in our world. She was my world. A hush fell over the room. Ethan's eyes were still now. You're done here. Victor, effective immediately. The board will vote and I'll make sure you never get near this company again. Victor's smoke faltered. Ethan turned to the others. Anyone else who had a hand in this resign now. Or I'll dig until I find everything. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The war had begun. But Ethan wasn't afraid anymore. Not because he had power, but because now he had a reason to use it. And her name was Aria. The next morning, Ethan stood at the edge of the schoolyard, clutching a paper cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He was waiting for the bell. For her face, for something that might make his chest stop aching. Then he saw her. Aria, running across the courtyard in her little canvas shoes, her backpack bouncing against her tiny frame. Her laughter rang out like wind chimes soft. Innocent, pure, for a moment. The weight on Ethan's chest lifted. She had her mother's smile. He could barely believe it that his daughter was right there, living a life he'd never been part of. When the teacher dismissed the class, Aria came skipping over to the gate where Maya stood waiting. Ethan watched from a distance, hands trembling. But then something happened. Aria stopped mid-step. Her gaze drifted toward him. She stared, a long, thoughtful stare. Ethan froze. Their eyes locked for a breathless second. Then she tilted her head just a little. Mommy, Aria whispered, that man, he feels familiar. Maya's heart skipped. She followed her daughter's eyes and saw him. Ethan, standing still, pale shaken, as if time had stopped around him. She hadn't told Aria the truth. She had promised herself she never would. But something about the way Aria looked at him with soft confusion, not fear, made Maya's chest tighten. She squeezed Aria's hand. That's just someone I used to know, sweetheart. Let's go. Aria nodded, but glanced back once more. She didn't know why, but something about the man's eyes made her feel safe. As they walked away, Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. His daughter had seen him, truly seen him, and somehow her heart had recognized his. He hadn't lost everything. Not yet. But time was running out. That night, Maya sat alone on the edge of her bed, the room dimly lit by a flickering candle. Aria was fast asleep, her tiny hand curled around the corner of a storybook they'd read 3 times before bed. But Maya's mind was far from settled. She couldn't stop thinking about what Aria had said. That man Arnie feels familiar. And worse, she couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. How his eyes had filled with so much pain and something deeper. Hope. She knew that look. She had seen it once, years ago, when he'd held her hand in a quiet hospital room and promised they'd raise their child together. A promise he never knew he'd broken. Maya had kept Ari hidden from the world, not out of cruelty, but fear that Ethan had moved on. Fear that his world of wealth and public pressure would swallow Aria whole. Fear that a man who had once loved her might now hate her. But today changed everything. Ethan hadn't looked like a powerful billionaire. He looked like a father aching for a chance. Elsewhere, in a quiet hotel suite downtown, Ethan stood by the window overlooking the city lights. Phone in hand, heart pounding. He had just left a message for Maya. Please, just talk to me. I don't want to fight. I don't want to blame. I just stay. I saw her, Maya, and I swear, I would never hurt either of you. Just give me 5 minutes. That's all I ask. He hit send and closed his eyes. He knew he didn't deserve forgiveness overnight. But he also knew that little girl, his daughter, had looked at him like she'd known him her whole life. And somehow that small connection gave him hope. The next day, Maya found herself standing outside Ethan's office building. She didn't know what she was doing there. Her fingers trembled as she gripped her phone, rereading his message over and over. But deep in her heart, she knew why she had come. Arya had recognized her father, and a child's heart doesn't lie. Ethan looked up from his desk as the elevator chimed. The glass doors slid open, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. It was her. Maya stood just beyond the threshold of his office, dressed simply, but the weight of the moment gave her the presence of a queen. Her eyes were guarded, but her hands trembled by her sides. And for the first time in years, they were finally alone. He stood slowly. Maya. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at him searching, questioning, maybe even mourning. I wasn't going to come, she said at last. Her voice tight. I didn't want to open this door again. Not after everything. But you did, he whispered. She nodded once, lips pressed tightly together. Because Arya deserves answers, and so do you. Ethan stepped forward, careful not to move too quickly. I didn't know, I swear to you, if I had. I know, she cut in softly. I believe you. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she turned toward the tall windows to hide them. You were gone, you were building a life. And I was just trying to survive. I was scared, I didn't know how you'd react. I didn't even know if you'd care. He stepped closer, but I did care. I do. Maya, I missed everything. Her first words, her first steps. I missed it all. His voice cracked, and Maya turned back to him, eyes filled with years of buried emotion. I didn't come here for apologies, she said, and I'm not here for regrets. Then why are you here? He asked, barely able to breathe. She looked up at him with a trembling voice. To ask if you're ready to be her father. The silence between them was sacred. Ethan's voice was a whisper, more than anything. That night, Maya sat beside Ethan on a bench in the city park, the same park where she used to walk with Arya alone. This time, Ethan was with her. Their knees touched. Their silences weren't heavy. And for the first time, they spoke not as lovers, not as strangers, but as parents. There were no promises made, no rushing ahead. Just the beginning of something fragile, honest and possibly healing. Weeks passed quietly after that moment in the park. Ethan didn't try to force anything. He didn't buy Maya roses or show up with grand gestures. Instead, he started with the only thing he had left to give time. He showed up for Arya. Every weekend, every after-school recital, every birthday she'd missed celebrating with a father Ethan was there. Learning how to braid her hair badly. Making a fool of himself in playground games. Listening to her talk about cartoons and science projects as if it were gospel. And slowly, Maya started to smile again. It wasn't easy. Some days the past still loomed too large. Some nights she cried alone. But then Arya would crawl into her bed, whispering, I like when Daddy tucks me in. Too, and something in Maya's heart would soften all over again. One evening, Maya was locking up the small cafe where she now worked, when Ethan appeared at the door, holding two paper cups. I remembered your favorite, he said, holding out the warm vanilla tea. She stared at it, then at him. Why are you really here, Ethan? He smiled gently, because I still love you. Maya, and because I think it deep down. You still love me too. I don't want to rewrite the past, I just want to build a future that belongs to the three of us. There were tears in her eyes, but also a small, brave smile. Only if we build it slowly, she whispered. He stepped closer and nodded, brick by brick. No shortcuts. And under the flickering cough lights, she reached for his hand not because she needed saving, but because she was finally ready to let him in. Together, this time. The house was smaller than the mansion Ethan once owned, but it was full of light, laughter, and mismatched furniture. The backyard had a little garden Aria was fiercely protective of, and the fridge was covered in school drawings and sticky notes that said remembered and class, or dinners on you, Ethan. Maya stood at the kitchen counter, humming as she packed lunch for Aria's school trip. Ethan walked in, hair messy, wearing an apron, and completely at ease. "Did you pack the apples?" he asked. "Already in the bag." He leaned over and kissed her forehead. "I love you." "I know," she said with a grin. "You tell me every morning." Just then, Aria burst into the room with her backpack, nearly dragging behind her. "Let's go," she shouted. "I don't want to be the last one again." As they stepped out into the sun, Maya looked up at the sky and smiled. The road had been hard. Mistakes were made, hearts were broken. But in the end, love found a way. Not the perfect kind, but the real kind. And sometimes that's more than enough. If this story moved you, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. More powerful, emotional stories are waiting for you right here on Hearts and Billions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.